Today we're going over royal bodies that were desecrated after death. And I don't mean a coffin quietly moved during a church renovation. I'm talking about a king dragged out of the ground and stabbed after he was already dead. 170 monarchs poured into a ditch of quicklime, and the most famous pharaoh in history cut into pieces by the men who claimed to be protecting him. Let's get into it. Number 1. Richard III, the king they buried under a parking space. It's the afternoon of August 22, 1485, and a group of soldiers are stripping the King of England naked in a field in Leicestershire. The crown is gone. The armor is gone. They sling him over the back of a horse like a sack of grain, arms hanging down one side, head knocking against the animal's flank for the entire ride into Leicester. He is not finished being punished. Somewhere on that road, someone drives a blade up through his right buttock, deep enough to score the pelvic bone. Richard is already dead. The wound has no military purpose at all. It exists purely so that the naked man draped over the horse, in front of a crowd, is also being stabbed in the backside while it happens. Osteologists have a clinical term for this. They call them humiliation injuries, and Richard's skeleton carries at least 3 of them, on top of 9 separate wounds to the skull, 2 of which would have been instantly fatal. The worst of those sheared away a piece of the back of his head about the size of your palm. They put the body on public display in Leicester for 2 days, so nobody could claim he had escaped. Then the Greyfriars Friars buried him. And here's the thing, they dug the grave too short. The anointed King of England was folded into a hole that did not fit him. No coffin, no shroud, hands possibly still tied. 50 years later, Henri the Eighth dissolved the friary. The buildings came down, and the location was forgotten so completely that for 4 centuries, the accepted story was that his bones had been thrown into the River Soar. They had not. In September 2012, archaeologists from the University of Leicester cut a trench into a council car park in the middle of the city. They hit him in the first few hours, barely 2 feet down, almost directly beneath a painted letter R that somebody had sprayed on the tarmac years earlier to mark a reserved parking space. The identification took another 5 months and came down to a furniture maker in London named Michael Ibsen, a 17th-generation descendant of Richard's older sister, whose mitochondrial DNA matched the skeleton exactly. The bones also settled a 500-year-old argument. The spine was twisted by severe scoliosis, curving into a sideways S, lifting the right shoulder several inches above the left. Shakespeare exaggerated it into a hunchback. The skeleton says something closer to a man in constant pain who wore very good tailoring. He was finally reburied in Leicester Cathedral in March 2015, with a procession, a cardinal, and a distant relative of his named Benedict Cumberbatch reading a poem out loud on television. The last English king to die in battle spent 527 years parked under a spot reserved for someone from the city council. Number 2. The kings of France, the ones who were emptied into a ditch. It's October 12th, 1793, and a workman is levering the lid off a lead coffin in the crypt of the Basilica of Saint-Denis, just north of Paris. Inside is Henri the Fourth, dead since 1610. He has been in that box for 183 years. He looks like he died last week. The embalming works so well that the face is intact, the beard is intact, the features are recognizable from his portraits. So the workmen prop him upright against a pillar and leave him there. And for 2 days people come to look at a king of France standing up in a stairwell. Accounts of what happened next vary, but several eyewitnesses describe a soldier stepping forward and cutting off a piece of the beard, and at least one describes a woman walking up and striking the corpse across the face. This was not vandalism. It was policy. The National Convention had voted on the 31st of July to destroy the royal tombs entirely, timed to the anniversary of the fall of the monarchy, and the work went on for weeks. Around 170 bodies came out of Saint-Denis. Kings, queens, princes, abbots, going back 700 years. 2 long trenches were dug in the ground outside. The remains were tipped in, and quicklime was shoveled on top to dissolve what was left. The condition of the bodies varied wildly. Louis XIV, the Sun King himself, was still recognizable, though the flesh had gone completely black. Louis XV had rotted so badly inside his coffin that the workmen backed out of the vault and burned gunpowder in the crypt to make the air breathable. But it got weirder. The Marshal Turenne came out preserved almost perfectly, and instead of going into the trench, he was sent to the Natural History Museum, where he was displayed as a curiosity in a glass case alongside stuffed animals and mineral samples for the better part of a decade. 24 years later, the monarchy was back, and Louis XVIII ordered the trenches reopened so his ancestors could be returned to the basilica in honor. That's when they discovered the problem. Quicklime and 24 years in a mass grave had done exactly what quicklime and 24 years do. There was no way to tell one king from another. Every bone that came out went into a single ossuary in the crypt. That's like pouring 50 labeled jars into one bathtub and then trying to refill them from memory. The kings of France are all still there, behind 2 marble plaques listing their names in careful order, in a room where nobody can tell you which one is which. Number 3. Tutankhamun, the pharaoh taken apart by his own fan club. It's November 11th, 1925, and an anatomy professor named Douglas Derry is standing over the most famous corpse on Earth with a blade in his hand. The tomb has been open for 3 years. The outer coffins came apart fine. But at the funeral, 3,000 years ago, the priests poured buckets of scented resin over the wrapped body inside the innermost coffin, and that resin has set into something with the consistency of hardened tar. The mummy is not lying in the gold coffin, it is glued to it. They try heat first. The coffin gets carried outside and left in the Egyptian sun for hours, until the metal is too hot to touch. Nothing moves, so they cut him up. The head is removed from the body. The arms are severed at the shoulders and again at the elbows. The legs are taken off at the hips and the knees. The torso is lifted out of the resin in sections. Working through the pieces, they recover 143 separate objects that had been tucked between the layers of linen, amulets, collars, daggers, bracelets, most of them solid gold. The famous funerary mask was also stuck fast, and it came off using hot knives slid behind the shoulders. Afterwards, the body was reassembled on a tray of sand for photographs, arranged to look whole. And here's where it gets really interesting. In 1968, a team from Liverpool X raided the mummy, and the scans showed that the breastbone and most of the front ribs were simply missing, cut away cleanly. They are clearly present in the photographs taken in 1926. Somebody removed them at some point after the examination ended, and the widely accepted explanation is that it was the fastest way to get at a beaded collar still fixed to the chest. Nobody has ever admitted to it. That is the Mona Lisa turning up between 2 inventories with one corner of the canvas neatly scissored off. And then, in 2014, staff at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo were changing the lighting in the display case, knocked the braided beard off the gold mask and stuck it back on with commercial epoxy, scraping the visible overspill away with a metal spatula. It took a German and Egyptian conservation team most of 2015 to undo it, softening the glue by hand with wooden tools. The most heavily protected body in human history has now been glued back together twice, and the second time was over a light bulb. Number 4, the Romanovs, the family that was erased twice. It's about 2 in the morning on July 17, 1918, in the basement of a merchant's house in Yekaterinburg. 11 people are standing against a wall, having been told they are being moved for their own safety and should wait there for the cars. Nicholas II is holding his 13-year-old son who cannot walk unaided. Yakov Yurovsky reads out a sentence. Then the shooting starts and immediately goes wrong. The room fills with smoke and plaster dust so thick the squad can't see what they're firing at. Worse, The four daughters had spent months sewing the family's diamonds into the linings of their bodices, and the gems are stopping bullets at point-blank range. The men switched to bayonets. It takes roughly 20 minutes. The killing was the easy part. The bodies go onto a truck and out to an abandoned mine in the forest. There the corpses are stripped, and the squad finds the diamonds, several kilos of them, sewn into the underwear and the corsets. The bodies go down a mine shaft, followed by grenades meant to collapse it. The shaft is too shallow. Everything is still visible from the surface. So the next night Yurovsky comes back, has all 11 bodies hauled back up, and sets off for a deeper mine. The truck bogs down in mud on a cart road at a place called Pig's Meadow. It's nearly dawn. Improvising, they burn 2 of the bodies separately, dig a shallow pit for the other 9, pour sulfuric acid over the faces so that nobody can ever identify them, cover the whole thing with railway sleepers and drive the truck back and forth over the top until it looks like road. And here's the thing. It worked. For 73 years. 2 Soviet citizens, a geologist and a filmmaker, located the pit privately in 1979 using Yurovsky's own written report. They lifted 3 skulls, understood exactly what would happen to them if anyone found out, put the skulls back, and said nothing for over a decade. The official exhumation only happened in 1991. The DNA confirmation came 2 years later, and one of the reference samples used to identify the last empress of Russia was a blood donation from Prince Philip, the husband of the British Queen. The remains were finally buried in St. Petersburg on July 17, 1998, 80 years to the day. 2 of the children were not in that grave, the burned ones. Amateur searchers found their bone fragments in 2007, about 70 meters from the main pit, and the tests identifying them came back the following year. They are still not buried. The boy has now been waiting for a grave for longer than he was alive. So, there you have it. 4 royal bodies that were not permitted to rest. Richard III stabbed in the backside after he was already dead, then parked on for 5 centuries. The kings of France, tipped into quicklime and handed back as one anonymous heap. Tutankhamun, dismembered with hot knives by the men who called themselves his protectors. The Romanovs, shot, burned, dissolved, and buried underneath a road. Every one of these people spent enormous effort building something meant to say permanently, "I was here." And in every single case, the only reason anything survived is that somebody failed to destroy them properly. Richard survived because a friary was knocked down and forgotten. Tutankhamun survived because workmen's huts were piled on top of his door. The Romanovs survived because a truck got stuck in the mud. Nothing was preserved on purpose. It just didn't quite work.